Greetings, walkers, and welcome to a Walk with Walt podcast where we talk about all things Walt and all things Disney for that matter. I'm your host, Kerry Rutkin, along with Pete Block. Pete, at last we are recording. We have been so busy lately. We just have, people have been asking, where are we? Well, we're here. But it's a lot of work doing this. To anybody that does this full time, I commend you. So Peter Block, Walt in the World is up with you.
We're doing pretty good, Kerry. Thanks for asking. Been hitting the parks. Mary and Hannah were just there yesterday, actually, and went and had a nice lunch, and we were there, but the heat got to them. It's that hot time of year, and Mom and I were walking around and going from shade spot to shade spot. So the visit was a little short until the heat got to us, but hey, it's still a good time at the park, and saw where they just reopened Haunted Mansion ahead of time, but it's already Nightmare Before Christmas,
Right.
in the 1st of August. So it's kind of weird, but it's open, and they're doing virtual queue on it. But starting to see some things move at the park that have been boarded up for a while. So it's been good. How about you, Kerry? What in
Did
the
you,
world have you been up to?
well, first, did you go on Haunted
No, we
Mansion?
did. Well,
Okay.
the virtual queue was filled up, so yeah, we didn't
Well,
we didn't get to.
well,
But I saw the outside, and they have they're still working on the queue area to the left there, and but the ride is doing virtual queue. You got to do it on your phone ahead of time. So if I would have thought about it in the
wow.
morning, I could have got up early and got a spot. But yeah,
It's probably the same as always, too. And everybody's in a virtual queue.
there's no queue area, right? So there's nowhere for a lot of people to stand by. So they decided to do that and just have people to come back on the return times, which makes sense. So, but it's good to see it open again. It's a classic, and it's been down for, I think, since January. So, things are moving at the parks. How about you, Kerry?
So,
What have you been up to?
I've been doing, you know, Disney wise, I've been doing a lot of research for our guests today. I've learned so much delving in the topic we're going to get into, seeing movies I've really never seen or haven't paid attention to. And I can't wait to talk about it. But I got to tell you, everybody, if you came here to talk about Oogie Boogie Bash and how it's starting on August 25th this year, and how excited you are, you can go, you're going to be disappointed. You came to the wrong place. That's 10 days earlier, Pete, than last year. But then again, maybe we should do a show on Oogie Boogie Bash. Halloween at Disney is now as long as Christmas. So,
I think it's as big as Christmas too. Honestly, I think.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal there.
Why don't we do it year round?
There almost are now with Haunted Mansion. It's
Why
pretty
don't
close.
why don't
It's
we
middle of summer.
do it? Yeah, since that already opened, let's just do Oogie Boogie all year round. It's not Disney making a money grab at all to do more events. It's not at all. Okay. So, but yeah, we should do a show on that. Okay, no goofing off today. No goofing off. Today we have a returning guest, and we are so excited to have him back. Steven Anderson has been a Disney director, animator, and is one of the world's great story artists. He has directed Meet the Robinsons and the Winnie the Pooh movie. We did 5 episodes with Steve, and it's really, I think, because of him, he put us on the map because it was amazing. There is so much more about Steven, about his background. So please listen to our previous shows because it's just too much to go through. So our earliest podcast. So Steve, welcome back to a Walk with Walt podcast.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Pete. Great to be back.
So apart from the book, tell us what you're up to these days.
I've been kind of the last thing I worked on was called Disney Junior's Ariel. It's a Disney Junior show about the Little Mermaid that just premiered a couple weeks ago, and I was working for a studio called Wild Canary, who's producing that show. So I was doing storyboards for that show. But then, believe it or not, just as of last Monday, I started back at Disney Features.
No, you didn't tell me this. No,
Nice.
I
okay.
didn't tell you this.
So this is big. This is big news.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome news. Great
Okay.
news.
So I started back at Disney Features, and I'm storyboarding on an upcoming project.
that you can't tell us about, of course.
I I guess I think it's been announced. It's a new Disney Plus series about Tiana from Princess and the Frog.
I believe I heard about that, but if
Yeah.
it hasn't been announced by the time we air this, we'll take it out.
Okay. I think they're gonna do something at D23, so probably by then it'll.
Ah, okay.
Oh yeah, it's just yeah. There we go.
You know, Pete said in our last episode, a walk with Walt podcast is a place where secrets are revealed. so, so we
Right.
we definitely tell things that we pledge not to. So, or
Yeah.
not really. Steve, before we move on, we're going to talk about your book
Mhm.
and how can people get your book right
Yes,
now,
well,
or how can they contribute to any fundraisers for it, or get a copy early? When's it coming out? Tell us this, and then we'll get into this today's story.
sounds good. Yeah, so the book is called Disney In Between: The Lost Years, 1966 through 1986. That's the full title. And it is being published by the Old Mill Press. So you can go to theoldmillpress.com, and you'll see the little icon of Disney In Between. The book cover looks like this,
Okay.
for those of you that are watching. And just click on that, and you can pre-order, although the pre-orders might not be available now because the pre-orders are actually starting to ship within the next few weeks. But you can still order it there on the Old Mill Press. And you can also order it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Oh wow. Okay,
And
great.
the official release date is September 10th. So it's coming up about a week, or excuse me, about a month or so.
But first of all, I want to say that this is a very important book, and Pete's also read a lot of it. So feel free to comment. But it's a very important book. It's a history book. Now, Steve, what year did you join Disney?
I started at Disney in 1995 when I was 25.
So was that in the Iger era, or was Katzenberg and Eisner still there?
Katzenberg was gone. Eisner was still there.
Hmm.
Very soon after I started is when Disney bought ABC. So then Iger came into the picture then.
Okay.
But Eisner was running the show across the street.
So one more thing about the book title, In Between Years.
Yeah.
That is a nod to the in-betweeners, somehow, the artists, animators.
Yeah, I mean, it has a significance artistically to your, like you said, to your point, as much as it does
The connection.
emotionally. Those, like we just taled about, those in
The
between
flow.
times.
Tell everybody what it is, first of all.
Yeah, and so the word in between, I'm sure many of you know, in animation, an in between is the drawing that goes in between two extremes. So an animator animates the extremes, which are the main poses, and then an assistant animator comes in and adds the in betweens, which are the drawings in between. So let's say an animator draws frame 1 and frame 8. Then the in-betweener is going to go through and put in frames 2 to 7 and fill in that action. So without those in-betweens, you'll have frame 1 and you'll have frame 8, and they will just pop. But with all those in-betweens in there, you'll have a smooth move. You'll have the animation will actually have a fluidity to it. And so to me, I saw a metaphor there. Because without those in-between drawings, the actual animation that you're seeing on screen doesn't have that beautiful lyrical movement to it. It's just two static drawings. So the in-betweens are very important in between those two extremes. But if you talk to animation art collectors and people that buy animation cells or animation drawings, what they value the most are the extremes, because those are what the animators do. The animators, the not the assistant animators,
Ah,
but
got it.
the animators draw those extremes, and those are usually, or they're also often called the key poses. So those are like the hero poses that are
Interesting.
really appealing and strong. The in betweens are sort of looked at as just utilitarian. They're just in there to kind of fill things out. So they aren't often given the value that they should, that they deserve to have in a scene of animation. And that felt to me like exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about an era in Disney that is not really given its due, and that's sort of looked at as not being as significant as the time before it and the time after it. The extremes, those key times, key historical times. So it all sort of like locked together for me. And so I thought, well, that Disney in between, that sounds like the right title, because it
Mhm.
a lot of different layers of meaning to it.
Now, you said, I'm going to have to play it back to get the exact words, but you said, I'm sure everybody knows this. Nobody knows this.
Well, some people, right?
Yeah. Well, I do because you taught me about it. Were you an in-betweener?
I did start off as an in betweener. Yeah.
Mhm.
My first job was a rough in betweener, so I was not doing the clean draw in between drawings. I was working for an animator, and I was just adding in some really rough in betweens into his scenes. So
Oh,
yeah, that's typically where in the old hand drawn animation days, that was essentially the entry level position. Pretty much everybody started as an in betweener in some capacity.
so on with your career here. You talk about Walt being on the third floor.
Mm.
That's where his office was, near the story department. Is that where story artists like you would have been?
Back then, if I was
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
yeah, if I worked when if I was a story artist when Walt was alive, yes, I would have been on the third floor. Which ironically is also, it's still where story is in the new
Yeah.
animation building, is on the third floor. But obviously, there's no Walt.
So if you,
Yeah,
uh,
maybe.
but who was the guiding light for you when you started being a story artist? Because Walt wasn't there. Was it the director, the producer, who the who animators? Who was your guiding lights?
Well, certainly the directors. My first movie was Tarzan at Disney as a story artist. So the directors, Kevin Lima and Chris Buck, certainly were very integral to that. But to me, the guy that I really looked up to, and who I said, "Wow, I want to be that," is a man named Kevin Harkey. He was a story. He actually, I think he started during this in between time. He might have started in the like 81, 82, I believe he did in betweening on the Black Cauldron, and that might have been his first movie. And then he later on became a story artist. And when I saw his storyboards, I was just blown away by um, how. I mean, there's so many things I can talk about Kevin's storyboards regarding the clarity of his storyboards were unbelievable to me. You can look at one of his sketches, and with no hesitation, you can tell exactly what the sketch is about, and that's the mark of a successful story sketch. Instant read. He had a freedom with how he drew,
Uh,
with how he put tone on his drawings. With he would, sometimes like shade color in or shade in an entire figure of a character just in black, just to make it pop, to make it read. And to me, there was also that takes incredible confidence, because coloring a character in completely black, you if you mess that up, you have to redraw it. I mean, now you can undo it, but that's making a really bold, a very permanent statement. And at the time, I did not have the confidence to do something like that. And so I was in awe of this guy, because he just had everything together. I mean, I don't know if he felt that way. I'm sure he had his doubts and his insecurities, but from my point of view, looking at him, I just thought, wow, he is the complete package. I want to be able to do boards like that guy. So Kevin Harkey, he was kind of he didn't know, I'm sure he didn't know that. I don't think I ever told him, and he wasn't officially a mentor or anything, but I studied his stuff like crazy.
On page 29, you threw out a real BTW, a real, oh, by the way. And the topic was Sleeping Beauty.
Mm.
And I'm kind of quoting from what you wrote. Walt was busy with Disneyland, the building of Disneyland, during the film's production, and his being away caused it to take a lot longer to make, and the costs really grew. Film didn't do that well. So Roy Disney tried to talk Walt out of making animated features. Work on other projects like another Disneyland in Florida, urban planning, art education. What? That's all you said. That was just, oh yeah, I mean, what? What? I hate to play what if. I love to play what if.
Yeah.
They actually considered not making animated films.
Yeah, apparently so. Um, like what you just read, they had got. I mean, we've all seen Sleeping Beauty, and the level of detail and artistry is
Mhm.
just like through the roof. So you can imagine that was an expensive movie, um, and costs had just gotten so. That movie, I think, it specifically almost broke the company, and yeah, they were just gonna basically re-release all the previous
Pinocchio,
movies. Yeah,
Snow
yeah,
White, every
the library that they had, which they were doing anyways, so they would just
Mhm.
continue doing that, and then Walt would take on some of his other projects. Hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine
yeah.
what if the last Disney animated movie was in 1959?
Mhm.
Now, you said that Walt wanted to give it one more try, and they did 101 Dalmatians, and that was a huge success.
Hmm.
But Walt apparently wanted to strangle the guy and his art style.
Mhm.
So here's a very successful movie, but it's now Walt saying, "Hey, this is not how we do things," and somehow he got away with it.
Yeah, yeah. Ken Anderson, who was an art director of many of the films, um, came up with that look of what's called um, the Xerox look of Disney animation. That the more scratchy line where you can kind of basically you're seeing the animator's drawings up on screen, and that saved a lot of time, a lot of money, and they were able to make 101 Dalmatians at a much more reasonable cost after the huge budget of Sleeping Beauty, and as a result, they made a profit, and Ken Anderson saved it. Which, to your again, ironically, with something that Walt was like, I hate that, I hate the look of that, and then also ironically, that became the house style all the way up through, uh, basically the Rescuers, Fox
Mhm.
and the Houndish. Then they kind of started getting back to a cleaner line again, but. Um, uh, so I guess for Walt, it was a blessing and a curse.
So it's interesting. He wants to make live action movies because they're less money to make,
Hmm.
and but you have to deal with the egos of the stars. But then again, dealing with the animators strike of the 40s,
Mhm.
you guys were not necessarily the best group either for him to get along with.
Right.
So no matter what you're going to have problems. But I could see that some of these movies had to cost so much less than an
Mhm.
animated feature.
Mhm.
So you quote Walt. I think if there's any part I've played, this is Walt. Oh, here. I have more detail. I think if there's any part I've played, the vital part is coordinating these talents and encouraging these talents and carrying them down a certain line. They're all individually very talented. I have an organization of people who are really specialists. You can't match them anywhere in the world for what they can do, but they need to be pulled together. That's my job. Now, with Walt gone, who would be the one to bring the people together? Who would they look to for leadership? Who would guide them into the future? With all these things, how about grooming his successor? Uh, was he just so unaware of being mortal? He's 65, almost close to 66, I guess, and doing great until he was stricken with
Mhm.
cancer. But is this book a case study in business? That you better leave a successor as one of the rules?
Yeah, I don't know why he
Because
did.
being a marketing major,
Yeah,
you know, this this is I'm saying this is a business book because look what happens.
yeah. It's fascinating that I think you hit it on the head. I think he either didn't think he was mortal, or he just kind of assumed that his people would keep going, I guess. I don't know. It's really interesting. I've never heard anybody who was around that time kind of muse about that topic, about, well, why didn't he talk about a successor, or why wasn't there anybody, earmarked for that day that nobody wants to talk about when we lose Walt. Um, I mean, it seemed very much like, we talk about in the book, and we've heard many stories from people at that time when he was sick, that he's he still can't swung by the studio, and he checked on what was going on, and maybe he didn't think it was that bad. Maybe he thought he was going to bounce back and that he didn't need a successor.
And people didn't really know he was sick. It
Right.
was, a secret.
Yeah.
So, but this book leads you down a lot of rabbit holes. Okay, there's so many other topics to go off on, uh, and this struck me. Now, so no successor, and you said there's no one to be in charge of the creative development. So they run it by a committee.
Mm-hmm.
How did that work out? You wrote a very powerful sentence about the board of indecision, as you called it. And here's what you say: but with Walt gone, instead of having only to appeal to one man's taste, he now had to appeal to a group whose tastes and judgment were based on interpretations of someone else's taste. So that'd be people interpreting how Walt would say about this.
Yeah.
So how did that work out?
Not very well. I mean, they continue making movies, so on that front, I guess it worked. From a on just the, just kind of a process standpoint. But um, it sounds like a lot of the writers at the time who were Walt's people, what writers that Walt had worked with, were getting really frustrated because of this. I think that was a Richard Sherman quote, "The Board of Indecision," what they
Mhm.
call that's what the Sherman Brothers called those
Okay.
guys at the time, because just nothing fresh, nothing unusual could get through. Even some things that Walt had kicked off that these writers were trying to continue um, pursuing and developing, even those movies were cut. And so they lost a lot of people. The Sherman Brothers also, that's part of why they left, is because of studio leadership were cutting a lot of their songs out of their big movies like Happiest Millionaire,
Mm.
and another one called The One and Only Genuine Original Family Band. And then also for new projects, they were dealing with this board of indecision, and they said, this is just not, this isn't Disney. This isn't the way Disney should be.
Yeah.
It's a you know creativity by committee sometimes can work, but often does not.
I want to bring back a point early in the book. I think it was a Kurt Russell quote saying, like, when Walt was here, things were changing all the time,
Yeah.
and then they stopped changing. And that got me thinking about a 12-year-old Kurt Russell on a film that Walt worked on called Follow Me Boys,
Yeah.
which is one of my favorite movies of all time. But here's a movie where you have a 12-year-old actor playing a son of a raging alcoholic, terrible father. I mean, these are like areas that Disney didn't delve into.
Yeah.
You got Fred McMurray, and I think Vera Miles was the wife. They're dealing with infertility issues. They can't have kids of their own. Another topic that's not normal Disney, but this is things that Walt okayed in this film.
Yeah.
You have the alcoholic father dying. Fred McMurray and her, they adopt this juvenile delinquent, Kurt Russell, and it's this beautiful story about how this juvenile delinquent kid found purpose and meaning and became an awesome guy through the Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and the Sherman Brothers wrote awesome songs. But I mean, it was a movie that wasn't your typical Disney, yeah, everybody feels good, and then you have this 12-year-old actor who does a phenomenal job. I mean, Kurt Russell's an amazing actor. But
Yeah.
then we go from that into like the computer wore tennis shoes, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, you have this talent and ability, and Walt was really starting to change himself and making movies that weren't normal Disney films. And then it was like they went way backwards and started making live action films that were just, slapsticky and Apple Dumpling Gang and Mayberry, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And it's that you said Mayberry, because
This is
so many of those
this is
movies
why I
are
love
like,
Pete. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say,
Please,
so
you
many
go,
of
you
those
go.
movies that you're talking about are they feel like 80-minute sitcoms.
100%. Yeah.
Like
They're
there's
funny. I mean, my
there's-
dad and I, when I was a kid,
yeah,
we'd watch Apple Dumpling Gang, but
sure.
Follow Me
I love
Boys
that.
would you'd be crying and then you're laughing. And it took you on a much wider journey of emotion
Yeah.
than just a sit down, feel good sitcom. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Walt was very, I mean, he didn't do it in a gratuitous way, but he was not afraid to show some of those darker corners of human nature. I mean, he knew his audience. He knew how they wanted to receive it. He did not sensationalize it or make it inappropriate, but I think he was not afraid. He knew you had to have dark with the light. He knew that it's lying to your audience, especially to children, if you say everything is just the Apple Dumpling Gang and that's all there is, and that does children a disservice. And so, yeah, I think it's a great point. And Follow Me Boys, you're right. Um, and of course, I mean, of course, Old Yeller is coming to mind, and
Exactly.
One of the darkest endings of a movie from
Oh, I'm still.
generation.
I don't remember any of the movie, but I remember the end. I was a little kid.
Oh,
I never want to see the
crushed.
movie again. Never
Yeah,
want to see the movie
crushed.
ever again. Yeah.
Could you imagine, a movie in the 70s, a Disney movie in the 70s doing that ending?
No.
No,
Because the
they would
committee
never.
wouldn't have allowed it. The committee wouldn't
No,
allow it, like you said.
no.
Yeah.
In fact, there's I talk about it in the book, in The Fox and the Hound. There's a character. So back to Kurt Russell, he does the voice of Copper, the hound dog, and he has a mentor hunting dog named Chief. And in the movie, I think it's also in the book, Chief gets hit by a train in one of the chases between the fox and the hound when they're more adversarial. And in the book, he gets killed. Chief is killed. And so Copper blames Todd, who used to be his best buddy, for the death of his mentor. And that really sets the third act in motion. Well, the directors of the movie of Fox and the Hound only wanted Chief to just get injured. And so they showed him at the end, showing up with a broken leg. Well, he's okay. Well, a lot of the younger animators were saying, you're crazy. You have to kill Chief. You have to raise those stakes. You have to do that. And they said, no, we'll just get angry letters from parents saying that we, traumatize their children. We can't do that. But I think you could. I think you could.
Walt
I
did.
think Walt would do that.
Yeah.
You talk about doing that in Bambi, in the book.
Yeah.
That it's been done. There's precedent.
Totally. Yeah. So, yeah, it's fascinating. Just the way things changed.
I love doing this with Pete because we think alike, and I love to question him on some of the stuff he says. But Kurt Russell was 15, not 12.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
He looked pretty
But
young on the screen,
okay,
though. So,
but
yeah.
you never say in your book, when did he say that? It sounds to me like he said that quote years later and not when he was 15, because that was his first Disney movie. So
Right.
it seems it would be later. So yeah, I'm hung up on that same quote too, Pete. But one last thing, I'm going to read something else from your book, and I knew this was going to happen. We're not even getting in the book yet, the first episode, and we barely got into the book. But gosh, it's just so much fun to talk about it. Okay, it's from the book. Making family films was Walt's legacy, and Roy, along with the studio staff, was dedicated to preserving it, ensuring that the Disney name continued to stand for the values that Walt espoused. We're talking about that, right now. Everybody questioned what would Walt do,
Mhm.
said Bernie Mattinson. And the thinking was, let's do what he would normally do and keep the family movies going. It became a thing of, okay, guys, this is our challenge. We have to keep making these pictures the way Walt would make them. Everybody took up the challenge. They felt responsible. Boy, do you nail everything in that paragraph, that they all took up the challenge. But then you go on to say the Disney studio forged ahead, but with a cautious glance in the rearview mirror. The future of the company would be informed by the past. Some doubted whether this was right. Then we bring up Kurt Russell saying uh, that was the problem.
Mhm.
It's status quo. But with Walt Disney, it was never status quo. So you nailed nailed everything right there about what happened. But of course, our lives are made up of our past.
Mhm.
Everything is.
Mhm.
We are our past, and we are looking to the future. But with Walt Disney, it was a new interpretation of the past, but it was how interpreting how would Walt do this now
Mhm.
in the new future. Yeah, he'd abandoned all the new technology. He invented a lot of it. He
Yep.
and iWorks invented, this technology. But now, no, 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 we can't use that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty profound what you said right there, Steve.
Mm.
That a nod to the past, but we're not moving on to the future.
Yeah.
Did that just?
I mean,
I'm sorry. Go on.
it's you're right. I think it's also it's it's very difficult to. I mean, that is part of moving forward. Is also remembering where you came from. So, were they? Should they not have done that? There's no way they couldn't look back and hold on to where they'd come from because that was everything. Um, it's like that was their downfall, but at the same time, I don't know how else you can move forward. Like you said, even in life, we just we're always informed by what's happened to us already in the past, and even still, I mean, we're still people at Disney are still looking at the old films and all looking at classics and getting inspired by those, and not wanting to remake them or slavishly, but but still being inspired, still saying, "Wow, look at what they did. How can we do that today?" So that is always an aspect.
Yes, they do want to remake them with the Little Mermaid and all these
Well,
other.
I'm
Okay,
talking about animation.
okay,
Yes,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
right.
animation.
That's a whole
And
nother
and
topic.
also, wasn't it Walt Disney who said, "Keep moving forward"? And
Yeah.
Didn't you quote that in
Hmm.
Meet the Robinsons?
Yep.
Keep moving forward.
Yep.
And uh, it's astonishing. Well, we are out of time. Steve, can I impose upon you one more again to come back so we could get into this even further?
No imposition at all. I would love to. I love
That
talking
would be
about
great. All right. Thanks, everybody. And come back for Steven Anderson part 2, which I think will make Steven Anderson part 7 overall. But this is awesome. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
thanks,
Thanks,
Steve.
Pete. All right.
it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys.